Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously,
where we serve candid cash combos with a side of sass and zero late fees. So we are just about ready to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Living Not So Fabulously. And in that year, we've received a fair number of questions. If you have a question, email us at podcasts@yahooinc.com.
Or if you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment in the comment section or drop a question. So, David,
Yes.
we're getting old.
Speak for yourself. What do you mean by that?
Well, we're entering early retirement ourselves, but we're at 1 year mark, and that's pretty old for a show.
It is.
Yeah, some shows don't make it past the first couple of episodes.
3 episodes. It's kind of the average, right?
Yeah, we're beating the average for sure. Which brings us to our first question. I'm 55, 65 years old, somewhere in between, and I have little to nothing saved for retirement. What do I do? We actually get this question quite a bit. We've gotten it even before we started working with Yahoo Finance. We get this question from our community, and I think it just kind of pinpoints where we are in the retirement crisis. I mean, we all know that we're in a retirement crisis right now, and we had Teresa Ghilarducci on our Queer Money podcast last year when we interviewed her. She said, so sort of the 401k experiment is sort of a failed experiment, and it's not serving Americans. And here are some recent statistics to share. According to Transamerica in 2023, when they surveyed baby boomers, the average median savings for retirement for baby boomers was $194,000. And when you consider the average cost in a nursing home without any special services for Alzheimer's or dementia, is about $108,000. That 194 is not going very far.
Yeah, and I think it was Fidelity that even said that the average couple in retirement will spend $168,000 just on healthcare, not on those extended living situations or nursing homes, places like that, just on healthcare. So if the median savings is only $194,000, that means that 50% of people have less than that and 50% have more. All those people that have less than that,
yeah, they're bringing down the
that's
average.
That's the crisis, right?
Exactly. And according to Transamerica, 10% of the people that they surveyed or studied had nothing saved for retirement. Now, these are baby boomers.
Right.
Like, they're already technically at the retirement age, right? So they don't typically have a lot of options available to them, although we'll talk about maybe some solutions here in a bit.
Right. And I hope for those people and for those who have a little bit more but not much more saved, that they're tapping into some sort of pension from somewhere, although hopefully they don't have a Golden Girl moment and have the letter that arrives that says the pension has gone bankrupt.
Right. Then recently there was a 2024 PRIP study by Alliance for Lifetime Income. They found that 51% of women between the ages of 61 and 65 had less than $100,000 in investable assets. Now, that's investable assets that they have for themselves. Among single, divorced, or widowed women, that rises to 67%. This is just one example of how a minority group, a different demographic, is struggling more so than maybe the general population.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, this is Living Not So Fabulously, where we mix real talk with flair. We're taking listener and viewer questions today. If you're watching on YouTube or on yahoofinance.com, drop a question that you may have for us in the comments section below for future episodes. John, let's talk about this. We know the data out there. We know that there's a crisis happening when it comes to retirement, and more people are coming to us saying that they are worried about what they do in retirement. Let's maybe talk about what's causing this and what some of the solutions are, because maybe some of the solutions are actually in discovering what the causes are.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to do is to stop beating yourself up over the fact that you might not necessarily be where you want to be at this particular age with retirement savings. I mean, I think it's really hard to send people to careers to become HVAC experts and plumbers and graphic designers and architects and all this stuff, and to become expert at their craft or the service that they provide their local communities, and then to also at night learn how to become adept at investing in the stock market and trading crypto and ETFs and all sorts of stuff. I think it's asking a lot of people to do that, especially if they don't have a passion for that topic. It's different if you have a desire for that, but if you don't have a desire or interest in that, it's going to be really hard. And I think when you add on to the psychological effect of what's called hyperbolic discounting, where we put off what we know we should do today for tomorrow because we're more concerned about with what's happening today than we are about tomorrow. If tomorrow is 20, 40, 60 years in the future, you're just not that concerned about it.
No, you're not. Yeah, you think, how many 7-year-olds are thinking about retirement? let
Right.
alone 27-year-olds. Right? We
Right.
don't think about it when we really should be thinking about it. We're not trained to. There is very little conversation with us as young adults, as early adults, as kids, that we should be planning for retirement. And for that reason, I think it's so easy for us to get lost in all of the scrolling or the other things that go on in life, and then say, I'll deal with it later. And so it's very common for people to not really be thinking about this until. And you know, it was interesting. We had Shamina Singh on the podcast several weeks ago, and she mentioned this idea that most people learn something when it comes to finances when they actually need it. Well, this is one where you really should be learning about it long before you need it, because you need to take advantage of compounding interest.
Exactly. And then I'll add to the fact that we are in a consumer culture. We have a consumer economy. We're conditioned and almost told by our presidents to spend, spend, spend. Prove that the economy is strong by spending, 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 right? That's the indication. You know, we're always talking about the consumer is propping up the economy. Well, the consumer is propping up the economy on credit card debt.
On crutches.
And it has no retirement savings.
Right.
And the only solution that our government is coming up with is, well, how can we make people work longer, and how can we take away any benefits that they've already put into the system?
Yeah. So let's talk about the solutions. I think that the whole idea of hyperbolic discounting and consumer may lead to some of the solution, and that is we need to talk about this more, not just ourselves with our family members, but just in general population. We need to talk about this so that it reaches young people when they're able to do this. And maybe we need to encourage more people to segment out that consumerism culture, and set aside some of that for retirement.
Yeah, I say over and over and over again, I think the best way to prepare people for long-term financial security is for more people to talk about their financial situations. What's working, what's not working. Make sure you're sharing what you learned, making sure you share the mistakes that you made. That right there, that's the nucleus of building generational wealth. And unfortunately, there's this popular notion that talking about money is rude and we shouldn't be talking about how much money we have. It's impolite, whatever. That strategy is failing people.
Right.
But I think on top of that, I mean, unfortunately, in this economy, we have to get a little bit creative with how we prepare for retirement. We can no longer rely on W-2 income, because, as we all know, real income is not keeping up with the cost of inflation. I mean, CEOs are doing great, but everybody else is struggling. So, unfortunately, we need to figure out how can we create multiple streams of income in addition to maybe your W-2. How can you figure out maybe just to create a small business of your own that you can generate additional income, and then maybe at some point in the future sell? How can you tap into maybe real estate investing, even if that real estate investing is renting out a room in your house or your apartment to someone else, or renting out space in your garage, your attic, or your basement for storage for other people to be able to store other things at your place for a fee.
Right. I think the whole idea here is somehow, if you're between 55 and 65 and you're looking at retirement being anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 or 8 years away, you have to figure out how to create a gap between what you spend and what you earn. And there's multiple ways to do that. Focus more on how to generate more money than necessarily cutting back, although I'm sure all of us could cut back a little bit. But the larger that gap is, the more money you're going to be able to invest. And some people may say, well, I'm 55, I'm 60 years old. Will I even get any benefit out of investing? Well, the reality is that if you're 55 or 60 years old today, you're likely to live to be in your 70s, maybe even early 80s. So some of you are looking at having a time horizon of 15 to 20 years to invest. So if you're able to put away $5,000 for the next 3 to 5 years or 8 years, that money, if invested, will grow to the point where you are going to be able to supplement whatever other income streams you have, especially if that only other income stream is Social Security.
Right, and then there are other potential solutions to look at, right? You could look at getting a life insurance with particular riders. You could look at getting an annuity. I know that reverse mortgages is sort of a controversial topic, but that may be, I think they've evolved over time, so that may be a solution for some people to figure out, how can I just create multiple sources of income, manage my expenses as much as I can, keep them as low as possible, especially if, to your point, I am 55 or 60 and don't have a whole lot saved for retirement. Having that sort of combination is sort of what we need to sort of lean into, I think, because Unfortunately, the government isn't necessarily coming up with great solutions, and we can no longer retire on our employer. But if we are younger, this hopefully uses as a sort of a clarion call to say, how can I start investing for retirement as soon as possible before my lifestyle inflates too much, right? Before it becomes too hard to reduce the number of subscriptions that I'm currently addicted to. How can I put more of that money into the stock market? Because now, David and I have been saying this for years. There's no part of the economy that's designed for success quite like the stock market. I mean, I haven't had the chance to read. There's an article out there right now where economists are saying, according to everything that Trump is doing and all these tariffs and this chaos that's been caused, why is the stock market up? Nobody knows. And I think it's because there are so many rich and powerful people who need the stock market to continue to increase that the sooner you can catch that train, the better it is for your long-term financial security. So please wait on for one moment. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to Living Not So Fabulously. We're back taking your listener and viewer questions. Again, if you're watching on YouTube or yahoofinance.com, drop a question in the comments and maybe we'll use that for a future episode. Or you can always email us at yfpodcast@yahooinc.com.
So we're going to take our second listener question. And our second listener question is one that has been kind of an amalgamation of not only people asking this question, but maybe some of the trolling that we get, especially
trolling?
on the Living Not So Fabulously YouTube comments. We're going to talk about how money is different for LGBT people than everyone else. And the reality is what we're going to talk about here is not just that it's different for LGBT people. Money is different for every single person. Every single one of us looks at money differently. One of the comments that we get is that money is money. Credit cards are credit cards. Investing is investing. It's all the same for everybody. Well, the way that we look at it is it breaks down very similar to the Pareto principle. 80% of personal finance is the financial side, the transactional side, where you're right. Swiping a credit card for you and me is exactly the same. Investing in Google is exactly the same for you and me. That transactional stuff, that is the same. The 20% is the personal side of personal finance. And I'm going to quote Morgan Housel here from his book, The Psychology of Money. He says, your personal experiences with money make up about 100 millionth of what's really happened in the world, but maybe 80% of how you think the world works. So what he's really saying here is that our personal experience with money is so tiny, it's such a tiny fraction of what really happens in the world when it comes to money. But our perception is what we then blast out as 80% of reality.
You don't see the world how it is, you see the world how you are. And we're each individual with different life experiences, different races, creed, backgrounds, socioeconomic status, histories. And that's why even twins, right? Twins can, in adulthood, have completely different perspectives and success with their finances.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why you have one twin that may be very successful and one that may be not so successful. It's because they interact with their surroundings and their money.
They've had different experiences.
Because of the experiences they've had in life, right? So here we're going to share some experiences that show how money shapes the way LGBT people maybe work with or deal with money or have the perspective or money story. That's what this show is about, money stories, how our money stories may be different. So for example, LGBTQ youth make up 40% of the homeless youth population. So there is a larger number or percentage of homeless youth that identify as LGBT. Why is that? Well, because many of them have either left home or have been kicked out of home because they're not accepted or welcome there, right? So how does that shape your perspective of how you work with or deal with money? Well, if you're leaving home when you're an adolescent, you are not getting the kind of education, you're not having that kind of discussions with mom and dad, you're not seeing your parents interact with money, and you also may be put into the world in a very desperate or scarcity mindset because you don't have anything. And so the way that you look at money is always that there's never enough of it, right? You develop this money story of I'm always searching and trying to find money, and so it's difficult. And so you develop this idea in your head, money is difficult. And that really frames how many young LGBT people think about money moving forward in their lives.
Then I also think, too, that if you're homeless and living on the street and you're seeing other people going about their daily lives and they look like they're flourishing, I can see how you would have maybe a negative perspective on people who are financially secure, right? Those people they're not giving me a handout. They're not helping me out. I'm not being treated well by society. So you have this sort of negative perspective of people who are wealthy. So not only do you feel like that getting money is hard, and then if you think that getting money is hard, it's as Ford said, it's going to be hard. If you see people who have money, then you sort of see them as evil in a way. Then you definitely don't want to be those people. But regardless of whether or not you've had a good experience with money or not, we're all going to be at some point 65 or 75 years old. But we can all, for the most part, expect to live to be older age. And if we haven't had the healthy perspective of money, we're not likely to have a healthy retirement account.
Or a healthy relationship with how we use money. Now let's talk about something that is apples to apples, the same for everybody. That's getting a mortgage, right? Getting a mortgage is something that everyone should be able to do and do it equally, right? We actually have laws to protect us so that we all have equal opportunity when it comes to getting a mortgage. Well, a 20-year study that was done found that same-sex couples were 73% more likely to be denied a mortgage even though their credit scores and incomes and debt-to-income ratios were the same as opposite-sex couples. And we know we have historical data and reference points that show what has happened to individuals who have been redlined and how they were not able to participate in the growth of what was going on in their communities financially, right? There were certain areas of town where they said, we're not going to invest in that neighborhood. We're only going to put these kinds of people in that neighborhood, and we're not going to go in there. We're going to stay away from that. So it keeps those areas depressed. Well, the same thing is happening to folks in the LGBT community. Historically, 33% of LGBTQ individuals own their home versus 66% of the general population. And much of that has to do with the fact that many of us were denied mortgages or maybe given unfavorable information about getting a mortgage so that we didn't get one.
Right. So we talked about earlier how the stock market is one of the great wealth builders in America. Well, obviously, we all know the other great wealth builder in America is real estate. And for a lot of people, a lot of Americans today, most of their financial security is tied up in the home in which they live. And would you say, what percentage of the LGBT population own their own home?
Roughly 33%. That's from a Prudential study that was done, I think, in 2018.
Yeah. So many people in our community are being left out of that great wealth builder.
Yeah, exactly. So other data that we have, John and I did an LGBTQ plus money study with the Motley Fool back in 2022 and 2023. That showed some very interesting information when it came to how queer people use money.
Yeah, in the 2023 survey, 55% of respondents said that they've been discriminated against by somebody in the financial services, banking, insurance industry. Now, that could be real or perceived, of course, and 49% of those people said that had an adverse effect on their long-term financial security. So overall, by and large, for a lot of LGBTQ plus folks, to put this into perspective that maybe many of us can relate, going into a bank and asking to open up an account or to get a loan is a lot like going into the gym class locker room.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings back a lot of negative emotions.
As a matter of fact, we have a friend of ours who started a business, wanted to get financing from a local bank for that business, walked in and literally was told, we do not lend to people who look like you. And that's within the last 5 years. This is not something that happened 25, 35 years ago. So these kinds of things prevent individuals in the community from having a positive outlook on not only the money economy, but also individuals within the money economy, and they want to separate themselves from it.
So we all know that small business, starting a business, entrepreneurship is the other great wealth builder in America that many people are being excluded from because we're just not all playing on the same playing field, right? Yeah. They're different playing fields, and some are slightly inclined, some are steeply inclined, and some are, for those who benefit, are completely flat. But I think a great example is the wedding analogy that we oftentimes use, right? The average cost of a wedding these days is I think is actually over, but it's about $25,000.
Well, now it's $35,000. When I originally did this data, we were talking about $25,000 being the cost of a wedding. So let's just say that there's two different couples who are going to get married. You have a same-sex couple and you have an opposite-sex couple, and both of them plan on spending about $25,000 on their wedding. The opposite-sex couple gets help from mom and dad. The same-sex couple, like John and I, get zero help from our family. But we decide to fund that wedding ourselves. Well, the opposite sex couple, let's just say that they take that $25,000 that they didn't have to spend and they put that into their retirement accounts. And the same-sex couple doesn't have that opportunity. What's the difference 30 years later when they're both able to retire? Well, depending on the rate of return, that $25,000 will grow to anywhere between $350,000 and $665,000. That's the retirement question that we were being asked of earlier. I'm 55 to 60 years old. I don't have enough money to retire. That's why we get that question a lot in our community.
Yeah. And that's just one example. I mean, obviously know that Speaker of the House, Johnson, and we have Supreme Court Justices Alito and Thomas are now threatening to remove a marriage equality, and there are like 1,000 plus tax laws, benefits that come with marriage, that if marriage equality is overturned, then same-sex couples are going to be left out of that as well, so which makes it just that much harder. And for opposite-sex couples, their ability or their right to marry isn't up for debate every 4 or so years.
Yeah, right.
So what are the takeaway? Well, my takeaway from this particular episode is we may not have convinced you, and that's fine. Everything isn't for everybody. We're serving a particular and underserved niche, money stories and conversations relevant to our community, relevant to them. All are welcome, but attendance is not required.
Yeah, and with that in mind, Yahoo Finance is serving up a multitude of flavors of personal finance for folks of all demographics. If you're looking for personal finance from a Black or person of color perspective, catch Financial Freestyle with our friend Ross Mack. If you want to have deeper conversations around retirement, check out Decoding Retirement with the great Bob Powell. If you love small business and would like that to have a woman's twist on it from time to time, watch or listen to the wonderful Elizabeth Gore's show, The Big Idea.
What's the easiest way to do all of that? Scan the QR code to follow Yahoo Finance Podcast for more videos and expert insight, because when you do, you'll find the money conversations customized to help you build financial security. And until next time, stay fabulous.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.